Today, we are talking about what issues Christians should support in the LGBTQ community. We're talking about gay marriage, we're talking about adoption, and other social issues. So if you want to hear about more of those, stay tuned. We are the Things You Don't Hear in Church podcast. My name is Derry.
And my name is Ethan. And guys, go check us out on the social medias. We're on YouTube, primarily on Spotify and Apple Music and anywhere else you find audio podcasts, as well as Instagram. We have quite a bit of old content on TikTok, although we don't like the Chinese spying on us, so we don't use it. It's actually not why. We just don't like social media. But yeah, so we're on Instagram. You could get a hold of us if you have episode ideas, you have questions about you want to hear, send us your requests there. And that is where you can find us.
So, like I said at the beginning, we're talking about social issues that Christians should or should not support. Sort of a debate. There's not a debate between me and Ethan, but there's a big debate online about all these things amongst Christians, right? And so I'll try to explain it well for us at the beginning, but these are pretty contentious topics, right? They're topics that have a lot of experiential realism for a lot of people, right? There's a lot of people who actually have to face these questions every day in whether it's a political or it's a social arena. They're very real. You yourself may have had to make some of these choices. And so they're hard choices to make. And I don't think they're choices that like make you saved or not saved, right? That's not what we're talking about. But they're important choices for the Christian to make so that we know where we stand when we're asked these hard questions, which is kind of the point of this podcast, right? Is to try to answer those hard questions. And as always, if you disagree with our conclusions, I mean, me and Ethan disagree sometimes too, but if you disagree, we'd love to hear from you in the comments, or if you want to DM us or call us or whatever, or if you want to debate, we'd love to have you on. And we like hosting debates too sometimes. So one of the first topics that we're going to talk about today, when we're talking about this kind of plethora of social issues that Christians should or should not support, maybe the first one we'll talk about is gay marriage. Is that all right, Ethan? Just an older one for us to talk about, start off with. A lot of these are going to get into political ideologies as well. So if you're not comfortable with that, maybe tune out. But if you are, then we're going to have some fun today. So, Ethan, what do you think about gay marriage? Should Christians support it? Should we not support it? Should it be a political idea that we talk about? Should it be a church decision? What do you think?
Yeah, the whole topic's interesting because what we're talking about when we're talking about LGBTQ issues, gay issues, and these social things is a lifestyle that is opposite what the Bible says people should do, right? So that's like one of the things that I'll always come back to is that this is not like we are against gay people, we hate the LGBTQ, we don't. That's not any of our ideas or foundations or anything. This is just like, as Christians, how do Christians interact with the world in which we find ourselves, and what is the most honoring way to God? Because that's what we're primarily concerned with as Christians, is honoring God. What is the best way to honor God in these views, and how do Christians handle this? And our views on how we honor God with this affect our political views and affect all these other things. So this is like no more different in my mind. This is no more less ungodly of a lifestyle than just being any type of non-Christian, right? And so that's why it gets really kind of muddy in how you interpret some of these things. So with the issue of marriage, as Christians, I don't think we should be approving of any lifestyle that's anti-God. And so gay marriage would be an anti-God. A gay marriage is anti-God. Marriage is not how God decided to set up marriage, and it's against the Christian sex ethic, so it's wrong. But the question is legally, as how should Christians think about this? And I think there's two fair arguments that one could propose and people can go back and forth on. On one hand, this is America, and if you're conservative or libertarian, you want the government in as little things as possible. So you should be like, let people do what they want. Who cares? This is America. If you have two consenting adults who are the same sex and attracted to each other, want to live with each other and commit to each other in some type of externally communicated bond to their community, and that's what legally marriage, you could say, is, and they want to enter into legal agreement marriage, who cares? Let them. It's like not your business what people do. And as a libertarian, I'm kind of like, yeah, I don't care what people do as long as they're two consenting and they're not causing pain for others. As a Christian, it's harder because it's like, well, the Christian view of marriage is that God instituted marriage, that marriage is a covenant created by God, not the state, and that's why it's sacred. And so, and I heard one person say, any marriage that is not Christian is idolatrous. I forgot who quoted that. So that's not even just the gay marriage; it's like non-Christian straight marriages who would be idolatrous. And there has been a few weddings I've been to where the people being married are not Christian, and it feels significantly different than when the couple is Christian. And I even had problems with that. I had I went to some weddings where yeah, people weren't Christians, and I knew they were living in lifestyles of sin before going there, and before getting married, they were sleeping with each other. And I'm like, I don't know how I'm supposed to, as a Christian, interact with this, because if I go to this wedding, am I approving of their sinful lifestyle, or could I at least say I'm celebrating that they're finally not going to be, sinning, in the idea of like having sex outside of marriage, and because they'll finally get married. So should I celebrate that? And so it's more than just like a LGBTQ gay marriage issue. It's a non-Christian marriage. It's like so socially, I think you could be fine as a Christian saying, I don't really care what people do as they're two consenting adults. They can do what they want, and I'm going to try to love them and get them the gospel and get saved. But I just, yeah, it's kind of muddy. I'm not exactly sure. Because legally I wouldn't say I would. I don't think right now legally I would vote to take away a gay couple's ability to get what the state calls married. But I don't agree that it's a good thing.
Yes, I think that's good. I think a good thing to look at in Scripture, because there's that tension that you're mentioning between being a Christian and being a participant in a state, in a political system, right? That's where the contention is. When I look at the Bible, and there's clear definitions of what marriage is, right? It's a representation. This is a very Christian thing to say, right? A very like evangelical thing to say. But a marriage is a trinity, right? It's a man and a woman and God partaking in this marriage and this covenant that you have to have God be a part of. And so if that's our definition of marriage, then does marriage really exist outside of a Christian marriage, right? Because if God is not a part of your marriage, then is it really a marriage in the first place, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree?
Yeah.
So then there's heterosexual relationships where like, well, is their marriage even really legitimate in God's eyes? Now, I think that it's not, in my opinion, but there are still social ramifications for how God created us, and God created us to be in a relationship with one another in a marriage context, right? So even though it's a distorted image of his relationship with a bride, even though that's still like a distorted relationship when you're a non-Christian, it's still a muddied image, right? So there's kind of a gray area there, because you can look at Scripture and there are marriages in Scripture that are mentioned that are non-Christian or non-Yahweh following people, right? In the Old Testament all over the place, and in the New Testament, people are mentioned that are married but aren't followers of God, right? And so the Bible still acknowledges that there are marriages that are legitimate outside of the sanctity of like God being a part of them. Okay? So even though I think the best definition of what marriage is that of God being a part of two Christian people coming together and being an image of Christ in the church, there's still some kind of muddied image there that like still constitutes some kind of marriage. Would you agree, Ethan?
Yeah, there's something in a non-Christian heterosexual marriage that bears the resemblance of what God instituted. And the resemblance is a male and a female.
Yes, that's good. So if that's the case, then I think that can kind of subside some of the problems, some of the tension at least between like living in a political state and living in like a state as a Christian, right? So like as a Christian, you can affirm, okay, well, I don't think you're really getting married necessarily, but because of my beliefs, but I still live in a state, and so I think that you can get married. Like you can do something because I believe in freedom, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're, and I'm not a libertarian on many issues, but when it comes to like these kind of things, I definitely am. Like, I want the most freedom that there can be. And so if I don't want to be able to tell people like you can or can't do this thing that doesn't necessarily hurt people, because then it becomes really easy for them, if there's more people on the other side of an issue than I am, to outlaw things that I care about that aren't hurting people, like being a Christian or different Christian acts or whatever, right? Like, I want to have the utmost freedom, even though that freedom allows people to do things that are not biblical, right? I don't think the Bible ever, unless you're under like a theocracy, which is like a government that's led by God, I don't think you ever have a system where God's like, you are not allowed by law like to do these things besides like the law of God, right? Which is a pretty big deal. But when it comes to like laws of states, it's not like you're not allowed to do things. Everyone is held accountable to God for what they're doing, not to like states, right? Like a state isn't the image and reflection of God's law. It's just the image of a reflection of like a people group, right? Or a certain regional location. And so I think the best form of state you can have is one that has the most freedom, so that the gospel can be freely spread, so that people can choose to accept or deny Christ with their free will. That's just I think that's the best version of things. There's people who don't think so. One that we actually invited on the podcast and might come on soon. Who knows? But I think that's the best version of things. So like Ethan said, I don't think that I would vote to say that people can't get married that are like non-Christian and heterosexual. And I think that would also go for same-sex relationships, even though I don't affirm either of those relationships, that they're in the eyes of God an actual marriage. I still think like I want the most freedom that I can have, and so I would be fine with those things legally happening. Although socially, if someone was to ask me, I would have different answers to those questions. Would you agree, Ethan?
Yeah, because what's interesting is if we want to say, well, as Christians, we should be voting against the ability for any of the gay lifestyle to be legal, marriage, any of that. The problem is, at what sin do you stop? If you're going to say, okay, let's make it, like, I think we should make abortion completely illegal, right? Like, that's murder. We already have murder illegal. Abortion should be illegal, right? I don't think, but I'm also not going to say all lying should be illegal, right? It's not like against the law to lie to your boss about why you were late for work. And as a Christian, I wouldn't say that should be punishable by the law, right? I'm not living my life in accordance with the American law as much as I'm living my life with the biblical law. Now, I do obey the laws of America because I live here and God calls us to obey the laws of the land, so much as they don't interfere with me living my life for God. But like you said, Derry, we are accountable to God, and that's the higher law we're living towards. And so what's tricky is there's like, people can quote Paul and say, I think it's 1 Corinthians 5 where it says, what do we have to do with judging the outsiders? Don't you know God judges outsiders? You judge people inside the church. And so we're supposed to hold church members accountable and not judge non-Christians. So someone say, therefore, why would I care what laws get passed politically in my nation? I'm still going to live for God, right? They can legalize all the immoral things they want. I'm still going to live a godly life and be against that. The problem is, I wonder, is like, if we have parts of our culture that are God honoring, we should try as Christians to preserve those, right? Like, we want murder to be illegal. And so if there was ever a vote like, oh, if there anyone was ever like, oh, let's have the purge and we'll have no laws and people can do whatever they want and no punishment. As a Christian, I would vote against that because that's going to bring chaos and sin into the world.
Right.
And so the dilemma is where's the line between what sins we want illegal and what sins we don't want illegal in our nation? That's really the crux of this issue. Sure. And we're just using kind of the LGBTQ stuff as an example because it's so politically it's around us in culture right now and where we are. If this was back in the time of the prohibition, I'm sure we'd be talking as Christians like, Christians, should we want alcohol legal? Because people, when they get drunk, they hurt other people and they're offending God and they can become abusive. They can cheat on their spouses. It's like all the sin proceeds from alcohol. So should Christians want alcohol legal? But right now we're like, Of course, alcohol should be legal.
I think there is an interesting tension there that I'm just thinking about right now between freedom and wanting things to be God's way, right? Because I would agree with you, like on first take on what you're saying about like if there's a current like ruling in the land, like a law, and it is in accordance with God's law, like shouldn't we want to keep it, right? I think that that's good, right? And so if we're talking about gay marriage, then it seems like if gay marriage is not like recognized by the law as actual marriage, well, that's the same thing that God's law kind of says. And so wouldn't I think that would be good? I think that there is a bit of a contention though there about freedom, where it's like if something isn't hurting someone, I would like for it to be legal, just because the more things that are illegal that don't hurt people, the more precedent there is for the state having control over things that I do that don't hurt people that could be illegal. Does that make sense? And so the only thing I'm worried about there is giving the government power over moral issues and saying, well, you can't do this thing because it's a moral issue the government deems not right that doesn't harm somebody. And I just have problems with that, because then the government could easily be like, well, we think that it's immoral to just really extreme circumstance to like read the Bible or something like that. And so you can't do that because it's immoral.
Right.
Like, well, that's not hurting anybody. And they're like, well, no, we think it's immoral, so you can't do it. Well, like, you're getting to say the things are moral and immoral that don't cause like physical harm to people. And so I just have a problem with that. So I think I would side still, even though like the first argument about the laws being in accordance with the Bible makes sense. I think I would side with the freedom side over that. And then, like you said before, let God judge people that are outside of the church, and then let the church judge people inside of the church. I think that creates a better world than the state having its hands in what is moral that doesn't hurt people.
Yeah, so as far as legally goes, I agree. Like, more freedom to people, government has less control. And again, there's problems with that as well.
Yeah.
You can go very far and say, well, then, if we can't live in anarchy. There's a balance. You want people to have freedom, but you don't want anarchy, because then there's just chaos. And so, but ultimately, yeah, agree. More freedoms for people to live the lifestyles they want and agree to, the better, because that means Christians will be able to, be the most evangelistic and free to live for God. And that ultimately might lead to a more godly nation, because if Christians can freely convert without hindrance from the government, and more people convert, more people will listen to the Bible. And we won't have to have laws that will say these things, because people will be Christians. So I think that's a good conclusion on that part, unless you have more you want to go into.
No, it's good. There's lots of nations that don't let you do that, right? Me and Ethan have both been overseas to nations where you're not allowed to convert. And if you're a part of one religion, you can never deconvert from that religion. Even if your ideologies change, politically, you can never change. And so I think what the government has its hands in is very important, that Christians think about and try to limit, so that we continue to have freedom. I think most Americans think that way too. Like, most Americans want freedom. But in this list of things we're going to go through, we have 5 of them. The first 3 are more legal and political, and the last 2 are more social. And so the next topic we're going to go to is, Ethan, do you think it should be legal, and then maybe socially, if it's okay too, for homosexual people that are married to adopt? What do you think about that question in the terms of children?
Yeah, I didn't know what I thought about this until I was like writing my notes out last week for this, and I was like, oh, I don't know. Oh, wow. I was like kind of like shocking myself at my conclusions, because it's not something I've ever considered. I don't know any gay couples who've adopted anyone, and I've never had to interact with it in my life, like in a personal level. So, I mean, the closest I got is watching Modern Family, and Mitch and Cam adopted Lily. That's as close as I got. But I instinctually lean towards, I don't think Christians should be okay. Well, of course, we should not be okay with gay marriage. I don't think we should be okay with gay couples adopting. And the reason I say that is because child rearing is not a right. Like, you're not entitled to it. It's a privilege that can only happen naturally in a heterosexual marriage. So, and I understand a lot of kids need adopting. A lot of people, people probably could have a better life being adopted by a gay couple than they would being either in the foster care system or orphanage. So maybe there's some merit there where it's like, hey, they're gonna have a better life here than there, and that I think I could be able to concede and say, okay, I understand that part. Maybe that's okay, but I still just can't get around how it's like it's not natural. And there also are a lot of stats that show the benefits of children having a mother and father present in relationship, not just two mothers or two fathers.
Even from just an anecdotal side, like it's very apparent to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say about that before my comments?
No, I'm sure I'll have comments as you're speaking, and your ideas will probably spark responses in my mind. So go for it.
Sure. Legally, of course, I think that it's okay. It kind of follows the same guidelines as the last one, right? Like I want freedom and something that's not hurting anybody. And so I think legally that it's fine. But morally, like Ethan was saying, it's more problematic than just the marriage part, because you have the marriage part and then you have the adopting part. And I mean, you can even go beyond adopting, and the same things would apply to like surrogacy, depending on how that would work within homosexual relationship, right? But I mean, obviously, it would be two women for that to work. But you get into the weeds there a little bit. I think the same things apply, right? The gender roles in being raised, the ethics being passed down. But I mean, none of those things are expected to be good under a non-Christian relationship anyway. Not that there can't be good aspects of it. Like, of course, there can be. But it's not a Christian relationship. And so God is going to be the one that has the say and how that goes and plays out and everything, not us in the first place. So, yeah, I think that's pretty straightforward in my mind. Politically, fine. Morally, obviously not, because that's not what the Bible teaches. And it's not going to be super healthy for the child, I don't think. I think the best argument against what I'm saying morally is the Bible does command to take care of the widows and the orphans and all that kind of stuff. And you could, like Ethan said, make an argument pretty strongly that a child would be better off not in a foster care home or not in an orphanage, and better off in like adopted by two parents, even if they're heterosexual, because you can make the same arguments for parents that aren't Christian. Like they're going to be just as messed up morally as a couple that's LGBTQ, right? Like there's not a difference in those two things besides the gender roles. But even then, the display of the gender roles in each parent, if one was male and one's female, is going to be distorted because they're not representing Christ in like embodying who they're supposed to be as a male and a female anyway. So all of that's going to be messed up from the get-go in any relationship where you have adoption. So would I just say that no one should adopt then that's not a Christian? I mean, in the most optimal world, Christians have the mandate from God to adopt and to take care of the widows and orphans, and we should be doing that as much as we can. So there's that side of it. On the other side, morally, I would want people to still adopt kids so that kids can be okay. And so there's a bit of a tension there. I would say that not like as a final statement, I guess, that non-Christians, just as a sweeping thing, should adopt and should take care of kids, and that Christians should adopt and take care of kids. And then we can comment, or like God comment on the moral ambiguities of all of that. I think that's as much as I could say. What do you think, Ethan?
Yeah, I'm wondering if when we could think about gay marriage, gay couples adopting kids, I'm wondering if we might be too concerned with the interest of the parents more than we are the well-being of the kid. You know, I wouldn't, because I can imagine a lot of people saying like, oh, that's so mean. You don't want people to adopt. Like, they want to have kids. Why can't they have kids? Like, you're just stopping them from fulfilling their desire. And it's like, well, I do care about the kid's well-being more than I care about the parents' interest, right? Like, just because, like, it's, is it a self-serving, like, prideful thing, like, oh, I have a kid, and they just want to be a parent so bad that they force it? Or is it like, I really care that kids aren't growing up in a family and don't have stability, so I want to be able to provide that? And so like, is it good for the kids overall? I believe I know someone who was raised by two mothers, and when they became Christian, they were pretty much excommunicated, and there's like a very bad relationship, if I'm remembering correctly. Um,
Sure.
and so,
Sure.
from the little bit I've witnessed, it seems like, and that happens all over the world, right? Like if you are raised Muslim in a Muslim nation, become Christian, they reject
Right.
you. And so it's not unique just to gay couples by any means. It's just, ungodly lifestyles. When you become godly, people
Sometimes
reject you.
Christians do that too.
Yeah, and Christians have done that when people
Yeah.
have like come out as gay or convert to different religions and stuff like that. Some parents, unfortunately, as Christians, they shouldn't do this, but they do.
Yeah.
Kind of excommunicate their kids. And as far as like caring for the widows and orphans statement, you got into this towards the end of your comment, but I do think that's just only can be applied to the church. Like
Christians.
yeah, I wouldn't hold anyone to that except for the church. And that's like why I think like, yeah, Christians maybe should be trying to have more influence in the adoption and foster care system than we currently do. But I know a lot of church communities that do a lot of that and
Yeah.
have seen a lot of life change through that.
For sure. Do you okay, so like politically you would agree that it's fine for anybody to adopt, right?
Politically, I don't want to stop people from trying to do things. I just don't think I would support it morally. Like if the law right
So-
now was
Yeah.
if the law was like right now gay couples cannot adopt and we're voting on this bill to allow them to adopt, I really would have to spend a lot of time in prayer thinking about how I want to vote. On one hand, I want to give as much freedom as I can to people. But on the other hand, I also don't want to allow for anyone to continue to live a lifestyle that perpetuates sin. And that goes back to the original tension of like, where is that line and how much do we get to say in it? Maybe you could say I'm just not going to vote because I don't know, but I don't think that Christians should just back out when we don't know. I think we should wrestle with these things, and that's why we're talking about it. I feel like I probably would vote for them to adopt, and then because that's just because then like yeah, then less people are in the foster care
I would agree.
orphanages, and that we know those are bad. We know
Yeah.
that's not good for people. So it's like, okay, we can make
Yeah.
it a little bit better, and just trust God that God is bigger than all of this, and He's going to be able to reach people regardless of what happens.
I think because I can't articulate to you a difference between the moral qualities of someone adopting that's just a normal non-Christian person and somebody adopting that's a homosexual couple, I can't tell you the difference in level of sin that's there, right? Like both have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. You could try to do like a competition to see like which couples sinned more, but you don't know the secret lives of the heterosexual relationship, right? And so like I don't know like because some people might say, well, like clearly one is more normal because they're not homosexual or whatever, but like that doesn't mean that they're like less sinful. Like they could be a pedophile or something. Or they
Right,
could, like
right.
there's tons of things they could be doing secretly. They could be more sinful and more harmful to the children. And so I think I would land in the same place of because I can't articulate a difference there. I think that it would be okay or that it is okay and that Christians should just try to adopt as much as they can. I think that's the main solution to the problem. Like don't limit anything both morally or politically and just do what God told you to do and adopt as much as you can.
Yeah,
I think that's the solution.
yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah.
All right, what is the next one we're getting into?
Interesting. Yes, the last more politicized one is one that's hot right now, and it's about what people or what our government should be allowed to teach in schools. So, do you think, and this is sort of a two-part kind of question, one for if someone is a Christian teacher and one for just legislation. Do you think Christians should support teachers teaching LGBTQ topics to children? If you do think that it's okay, then at what age do you think that it's okay? I think it's also part of the question. And then if we want to later, we can get into like what should you think is okay to do as a Christian teacher. But what do you think?
I don't think any school or government should teach in school any sex ed. I think that should be a conversation in the family. Because I was thinking about like, well, I don't want them to teach like, I don't like you can't teach like 7-year-olds or like third graders or fourth graders like any sex ed in my mind. That's like too young. You don't need to talk about like how baby like in my mind that the parents should do that. And I'm saying that trying to because
For a 7-year-old?
anyone, any age. I think maybe in high school when the kids you can talk more about it. Like when kids are a little bit older and have formulated their worldview a little bit more. But when they're young, I don't think the government should be involved in that. And the reason is because I think that's one of the most charitable views towards everyone. Where I could say like, well, I don't want them teaching in school about trans issues. And it's like, well, let's go back even more. I don't want them talking to my kids about gay relationships. And then I'm like, well, why would I want anyone talking to my 8-year-old or 10-year-old about how any type of sex works? I like let the parent decide when they're ready to have that conversation with the kids. And the schools should teach like arithmetic, history, science, like English, literature, like like it doesn't need to be a conversation about like with children. I would say high school probably is more okay because then and maybe as an elective type thing because then the kids and the parents can decide if they want to. But I'm like I just don't. After thinking about it, I'm like I don't see why the government needs to teach this stuff. Like anatomy makes sense in high school, but like why can't it just be all topics of sexuality? Why can't that just be taught or be a family issue?
Interesting. Anything more you want to say about that?
Not really, but I will say actually, yeah, like the keeping it in the family makes everyone feel like everyone has the same amount of availability in a sense where it's like no specific group is being ostracized because I can't think of a political reason why like it's wrong. Like if I'm not a Christian, right? It's not if I was going to like just politically and without thinking about Christianity, it's like, yeah, why would you not just teach all the different possible ways about sex ed and these possible things? But then as a Christian, I'm like, well, I don't want them teaching about these things that I disagree with. But that's just because I theologically, and I would say, I just theologically disagree with these things. So now I'm just I want the government now to serve my bias, which I think is wrong. I don't want to just be like, yeah, serve my bias and not these guys' bias because they're in the same boat. Now I have no, like, it's a moot point almost, So then I'm like, okay, well then how about the government doesn't do any of it?
Sure. That makes sense. Okay. What do I think? I think that this is more of a age question than a should they or should not they teach it, because I think they should teach it. And so I think it's more about the age. The reason I think that they should teach about it, and I actually might have a view that kind of goes against a lot of Christians on this one. I think schools should teach all spectrums of what people believe about sexuality, just to be fair to everybody, just as what's represented in society, right? Like if there are, like, we're not hiding anything from kids. You know what I mean? Like if you're going to public school and you're in junior high, you're very aware of every lane of sexuality that exists if you're a kid today. You know what I mean? Like you've probably seen the corn, and beyond that, you see the kids that are also there that also display all of those like levels. The problem is going to be towards the bias of the teacher that's teaching, and if they're portraying things as good or bad. I can get into all of that in a second, but I guess to respond to what you were saying at first, Ethan, the reason I think that they should be taught in school is because it's part of anatomy. Like anatomy, even if you're a kid and you're learning about like just animals in general, like a big part of animals reproducing is sex. And so like you're going to learn about that, and you're going to be like, well, what about humans? And like pretty quickly you're going to have those conversations. It should be the responsibility of every parent to educate their children primarily, but unfortunately it's just not the case. Like most parents won't take the responsibility for doing that. Even most Christian parents won't. Like almost all of my friends didn't have some kind of sexual education from their parents, and they didn't get some kind of sexual education from their school either. So the only education they had was from things that they watched or friends told them things, right? Which is pretty bad, I would say. And so of course, there's going to be abuses of this depending on the teacher's bias, the school's bias, all of that kind of stuff. But I think it would be in a perfect world, not a perfect world. Yeah, in a perfect world where like everybody's free, just teaching about the different spectrums of how sexuality is displayed in humanity, whether fallen or not, or like whatever your perspective is, and then letting a parent be like, hey, like this is what you learned in school. You learned that there are some people who identify as trans. You learned there are some people who are attracted to the same gender, and you learned that there are people that are attracted to the same gender and can reproduce, and this is how they reproduce. We've taught you about that too, and from a biblical perspective, this is what is supposed to happen. This is what is good and God honoring, and these other things aren't. And then letting them like not be afraid of the information from there. I think it would be natural to teach about those things because it's just part of human anatomy, and how we operate. More I have to say, but what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you raised some fair points, like basic anatomy, animals. I think it's hilarious that we have completely opposite takes. I'm like, teach none of it, and you're like,
Yeah.
teach all of it. So that's hilarious.
Yeah.
But I do think you could say, and I think this would be a fair middle ground, like have the basics of reproduction taught, maybe, and you could like poll parents to figure out when they think this is appropriate. Obviously, I'm not a parent yet, so I don't know.
Sure.
But like maybe
Sure.
by 5th grade, they should know the basics of reproduction. I have no idea. But then I think
What is that, 11? Right?
I don't know, 10 or 11.
I'd say 11 or 12.
Yeah. And then
Would
it's
be
like
a good time.
like before they go through puberty, right? You don't want them going through puberty and having these hormones and experimenting and not knowing what's going on. And so,
Sure.
but I know some people
Sure.
like there's a spectrum between like 8 and whatever. But I would say you could say, okay, every school should teach the basics of reproduction so they can handle anatomy and biology and animals and stuff like that. And then maybe each school or school district can vote on how much more further they want to go. And maybe it's already like that. And so therefore then, and maybe leave it up to each school, because then they can turn, like some people are like, oh, we want all of them to be taught. So then it's, and some other schools are like, no, we don't want any of them taught. And then the parent can decide which school they want to send their kids to and which one they're most comfortable with. And then no one is, that allows the most freedom, right? Where there's freedom for anyone of all different views to have their preference. Some schools don't want to teach it. Other schools do want to teach it. Those parents can send them to that school. I can send my kids to this school. You know, that would be, I think, a fair middle ground.
That'd be good. Yeah. The problem is that there's like most parents can't afford like to just decide where they want to send their kid to school, and they're mostly just going to send them to whatever the public school is, and usually there's like some kind of, I don't know, standardized like teaching that public schools teach per state.
Or maybe if each school is going to, because I can't imagine right now every school in America is teaching all the possibilities of attraction and gender ideology.
Well, it's different. It's different state to state.
Yeah, exactly.
And of course, there's a difference between education and propaganda, right? And so, for sure, in some of these schools, teachers are teaching propaganda that like certain things are normal and certain things are abnormal and all that kind of stuff, right? That's like a propagandized version of it. In my mind, I would just be like, hey, like don't teach from like a moral perspective, just teach from like a this is what's happening. Like we're seeing people that do this, we're seeing people that do this. This is how this act works, and this is how babies are made. These are the chemicals that are produced in your brain, and these are the things that happen when like these areas are activated, and these are the responses. And then this is what we see in society. And now you understand, and you can make your own moral judgments and choices. And of course, there's gonna be a lot of teachers that don't teach that way, but I think that's how it should be done, so that we're not hiding anything from kids. They understand the process, they understand their bodies, and then they can make choices from there. When you start to, of course, like our culture has propagandized things and have moral views on what is right and wrong that teachers bring into the classroom, then it's hard to have a free society where we say this is good or bad or anything like that, because we're bringing that into like a subjective space where people should be able to have their own opinions about that. Let's just bring in the facts. You know what I mean? That's what I want.
Yeah. And then maybe you could also, I'm sure probably schools are already doing this, but you could opt for your kid to not go through some of those things. Like if I had a kid and the school was going to teach on like a bunch of trans issues, I would want to review what they're going to be teaching and what they're going to be saying. Because I've seen videos of PTO conferences where they will like read from the students' literature what they're receiving from the school, and it's incredibly graphic.
Sure.
And then the PTO teachers or whatever, or maybe is it PTO, like the meetings where like the community comes and the teachers are there.
Parent teacher conferences.
Not conferences. It's like I think it's a PTO meeting, but it's like the parent teacher and like they're in a like there's a panel. It's basically like a giant voting thing to see like what we want. But this guy like read out loud. He's like, "This is for what you're teaching our kids," and he read it out loud. And they told him in that meeting full of adults, "Hey, that's too graphic. You can't say that out loud." And he's like, "You guys are teaching this to our kids. Like this is crazy." So it's like you would want as a parent to review and see if you could want your kid to go into that, because it's not at all that I'm against kids learning about different sexual identities and beliefs and views. It's that I would want to be the one educating my kid on that and not the state.
Sure. And you should want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, it's good. I don't want the state morally educating my child about something. I just want them scientifically educating them about it.
Yeah.
And I guess those lines are blurred sometimes depending on the state you're at and the school you go to and stuff. So that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Right,
Yeah.
right.
Nice. Any other gray areas in there you want to go through, or do we go to the next topic?
No, we got the social dilemmas now as Christians. Covered the legal ones. Now we got a couple more social ones.
All right. Okay, so we talked about gay marriage at the beginning. What do you think about Christians going to gay weddings in support or just to attend? What do you think? Should that be something a Christian should do or shouldn't do?
I think I used to say it might be fine because what's the difference between going to that and a non-Christian wedding that's just heterosexual? And now I'm not so sure. I think I would say Christians should not go to gay weddings, but I don't have like a strong articulation of why.
Yeah, I'm trying to get at that too because I understand that perspective and I think I mostly agree. I need to have some kind of articulation of like why I think those things are different. And the only one that I can kind of come up with is that there's a very optical social thing that you're supporting by going to an LGBTQ wedding where you're not really making a political statement necessarily in support of going to a like non-Christian wedding. Like if both parties know I don't necessarily think they're getting married, like I could go and support both of them. But the thing is, for one of those things, it's going to say something socially about what I think morally to people that the other one isn't going to say. And that's the only way I can really articulate it, because morally there isn't a huge difference, because morally I'm supporting two things that I don't believe are actual marriage. And so that's kind of a problem, but I could kind of work my way around that a little bit. The bigger problem in my mind is, what are you optically supporting to the culture, right? Mm-hmm. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a great point.
Like, I don't think going to a heterosexual relationship wedding is telling anybody in the culture, hey, I think that it's like cool for like heterosexual people to get married and that are not Christian. Like, someone could ask me my views about that and easily find out that I think that, I mean, they're not getting married in the eyes of God. It's just like of the state, right? And that's the same thing for a homosexual relationship. But if I go to that, it's like I'm supporting that union as like a moral and political statement. And I think that's different.
Yeah, that's a great reason, I would say, that articulation of why not to, at the very basics. You're like, what you allow yourself to sit through kind of like says some things about what you're allowing, what you think's okay. And it's kind of like the same reason I won't go see movies with nudity in them, because I don't approve of that type of art. That's just porn. I'm not going to go watch it. And I think like, I know different Christians have different convictions. I know a lot of Christians who watch movies with nudity in it and they're just like, I just skip through it or whatever. But I'm just like, but there's something there where it's like, well, one, I'm a married man. I don't need to be looking at any other woman. But also, even if you could close your eyes or skip it, it's like, why even be in an arena where that's the thing that happens? You know what I mean? It's like, I'm not approving of this lifestyle. I'm not approving of like a lot of those movies showing ungodly relationships. Like, there's one movie that's out right now. I saw not the trailer, the poster of, and I was like, "What's that about?" And I looked it up, and it's about this woman who's a businesswoman, and the whole movie is about this affair she has with her assistant. I'm like, why would you watch a movie that's just about sexual immorality? It's not like, it's not like Oppenheimer, where it's like, I didn't see Oppenheimer, but I know Oppenheimer is about. It's not like, oh, I'm watching Oppenheimer about the story of the creation of the nuke, and this is just a side part of the story. It's like that one movie is the entire movie is sexual immorality, and it's an affair. So why would you watch that? It's the same thing. Like, I think you could make an argument for it.
Man, I do struggle with this one though, because on one side of it, I think most people who would go to an LGBTQ presenting wedding would say, and this is more from a progressive Christian standpoint, they would say, well, we're supposed to, like, Jesus spent time with the marginalized, and we're supposed to love people. And then they might make some biblical arguments like love is love, and in the Bible it's more about the covenant than it is about the gender roles. I think all those fall apart pretty quickly, and so like there's not really a point in like commenting on a lot of those. But the parts that I struggle with more is the social aspect of, like, if I have a relationship with this person, I want to support that person in relationship, and I know that by me not going to this event is going to, for most of my relationships with my LGBTQ friends, unless they're really cool, you know what I mean? Like, most of them, like, that's going to hurt the relationship. Like, most of them are going to be like, I totally understand your religious beliefs. It's totally fine. You don't come to my wedding. We can still go, like, have fun after this or whatever. It's probably not going to happen. You know what I mean? Like, it's probably going to cause a rift in the relationship, which you could just say is a product of me having to stand up for my morals. And if that's the case, then that's okay. But that's the part that I struggle with about it. Like a lot of people would tell me, well, couldn't I just say, like, tell them, hey, I disagree with what you're doing, but I want to come because I'm your friend and I love you. And I think if a Christian did that, I wouldn't have the hugest problem with it, but I wouldn't do it myself necessarily. Like, I do think that there is a moral and political statement you're making by going and showing your support that could be a problem. And so for me, I wouldn't do it. But yeah, I'm not sure. I go back and forth.
Yeah. I think there's definitely, we could spend the whole episode talking about just this, because there's so many reasons you could go back and forth, right? But you're kind of hitting that right on the nail on the head when you say, like, it's the optics, because your life represents something. Like, as a Christian, your life represents God, and you should give your time to what God approves of and what God cares about. And obviously God cares about reaching sinners and them entering heaven. And so we're not saying don't ever hang out with a non-Christian because you want the optics to look good, right? But it's like, yeah, you don't want to go and send a message that's opposite. Like, if you go, are people going to say, oh, God must be okay with this because it's Christians here, right? And I wonder, here's an interesting question that just makes it more confusing. Does your family relationship make a difference in the decision? So if I had a sibling or a cousin who was gay and they got married, could I go to that wedding because they're my blood family? Or should I refrain because of the same things we're talking about now?
Yeah, I think you should go in that instance, because optically, if someone sees, hey, someone's brother went to their wedding, I'm like, there's not a huge statement being made.
Yeah, it's like, yeah,
there.
of course.
You know what I mean? Like, of course I'm going to be at that person's wedding. And it's very easy for my family relationships for me to say, hey, this is what I believe, and this is what me going to this event means. It's much easier to not have miscommunications there, and so I have less of a problem with it. If there was a Christian that said, no, I won't go purely out of not wanting to support that lifestyle, I would be okay with that too, and I would understand that perspective. But I think it's easier to understand somebody doing that because of the type of relationship they have and how it will be viewed, that it would be okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a fair response.
But I can see both sides of that. It is hard. For me, there is some kind of separation between personal beliefs and like personal relationships. Like, of course, there's some kind of separation there, and there's going to be some way that I play that out. This is just one of those gray areas that's hard to say because of the cultural moment we're in. If it was a like really small wedding or something like that, and there's not a lot of people there, there's not a lot of optics, then it's maybe even a different situation then too. I don't know. It's very situational, I feel like.
Yeah. And yeah, I think it's situational could be a good statement. Definitely something to be talked through probably with your pastor if you find yourself in this situation. Because on one hand, it might look like you're affirming of this lifestyle, and people might think, oh, it's fine, I don't need to repent. On the other hand, it could mean, wow, this Christian's really loving. I want to get to know them. And then ultimately a lot of people from that community come to know Christ because you went there. So, like, how do you determine that? I have no idea. Maybe that's a decision between you and your pastor.
The two best arguments I hear for it and reasons why I might want to go to LGBTQ wedding, especially if the person's close to me, right? These are the two reasons why I would go and why I would like consider it if someone asked me to, would be one, the reconciliation in a lot of the attendees' minds of seeing a Christian there, because if they know I'm a Christian, they know I don't support it, right? So it's not really bad for them necessarily. Like, they're not thinking I support it for some reason. Like, they know what I believe in, but it could do some reconciliation in their minds of saying like, oh, look, this Christian isn't judgmental. Like, this Christian, like, is loving his neighbor well, and like that could restore some relationships there so that you could have an open door to my second point, which is being able to witness to the crowd that's there. Like, you're going to have a lot of opportunities at a wedding to talk to individuals, explain your story, get to know them, create relationships, evangelize. Like, there's going to be both of those things present of you being able to evangelize and you being able to hopefully bridge some gaps in people's minds that are there about why you believe what you believe and what God believes about them and how much he loves them. So there are some definite bonuses and like positives to going to one as well. So it's another reason why I kind of go back and forth on the issue.
Yeah, all fair points. Very good. And so maybe each individual's left to follow their conviction.
Yeah, the usual arguments people make for it, I think, fall so easily on their face of like, just love your neighbor and love is love and it doesn't matter that much and the Bible doesn't really say that or whatever. Like, those are all so weak and so easily like counterfeit and destroyed by just any amount of context from Scripture that I don't think they're good to use. Just like the typical like progressive tropes about it. But the ones we mentioned, I think, are pretty good of just restoring those relationships and being able to evangelize. I think that in some cases those two reasons would outweigh the optics of it, but it depends on the situation, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's this last one?
We are running out of time. Yeah. Ethan has to leave in 2 minutes, so
I ain't
here
gonna
we go
do
for
it.
the last one. It'll be quick. Going to pride parades. So do you think a Christian should supportively go to pride parades? And I think a lot of people will immediately say like, duh, no. But what if someone's saying like, well, should a Christian go to a pride parade to try to restore relationships or try to support people that are usually marginalized or oppressed and stuff like that? What do you think in those responses?
I don't think we should, because you shouldn't support that lifestyle. And so you shouldn't go and give your support. Even if you're like, I want to be there for my friends. It's like, you can be there for your friends without, like, your friends should know you're against their lifestyle and you still love them. You know? Like, I would say Christians should only go there for outreach and evangelism. And don't be mean to the people, but, like, going there should be only to try to save people and share the gospel and, you know, answer their questions, but never in support of, like, I'm approving of this lifestyle and so happy my friend found a thing that they think brings them peace. It's like, I don't think that should be what Christians do.
I would agree. Just like I wouldn't go to a pride parade because it's just blatantly supporting an ideology, I wouldn't go to a corn parade. You know what I mean? Like, like just because it's something that's stigmatized and becoming unstigmatized doesn't mean I'm going to go to a celebration of it, because it's a pretty blatant celebration. I don't see how you could go to one and that would be okay. I have lots of friends that are Christians that do go to them. I don't know how they justify that. I honestly just don't think they think about it or they're affirming, which that's their decision and their choice. But I don't see many worlds in where that would be okay beyond the Bryce Crawfords going to evangelize. You know what I mean? Like, in a loving way. Like, I don't see how that is going to be productive. Like, if you're a Christian, you want to go to a pride parade for the direct like goal of reconciling like relationships with people and having conversations and restoring what it means to be a Christian and to love people that are LGBTQ, that's cool. You got to do that in the right way. But I think that'll be fine then. But if you're just going to support, then I don't see how that's a biblical thing you can do.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. All right.
Pretty straightforward, I think.
Well, I got to get out of here.
There we go.
Going up to my parents for the weekend. So I'm going to get going. This is a great episode. A lot of good content. We covered a ton of stuff. If you guys are struggling with these questions, let us know in the comments. If you disagree, also let us know. And please hear our hearts. We're not trying to offend or make anyone mad or ostracize anyone. We're just trying to get down to the bottom of how the Christians should interact with this subject in our world. It matters today. And so pretty good content. I think we were loving, and I don't think we were mean. So yeah, have a great week, everybody.